Hi guys, so I figured today we would test your skills a little bit on factoring quadratic functions. Quadratics are when the highest exponent is to the second power. You do have different types of quadratic functions. Sometimes there's three terms, sometimes there's two terms. So what I'd like you to do is just copy down the questions, pause the video, just see how your factoring skills are. And then from here, I will go over the steps, but remember the steps are written down under the factoring quadratic functions tutorial video. So this is just more of a Quizlet, if you will. So starting here, we multiply first times last, A times C, and we need two numbers that multiply to be 10 and add up to be 7. And those two numbers happen to be 5 and 2. You can take a sidebar, list all the numbers that multiply to be 10 to check which ones add up to 7, but just to save on time, the two numbers are 5 and 2, and then over each number you always put the first coefficient and split up the x squared into just x. So 2x, 2x. I write them as fractions because we try to reduce if possible. 2x and 5 cannot be reduced, but 2x over 2, they can both be divided by 2, and this will leave me with x over 1. So my two parentheses, the first fraction is 2x over 5, so it will say 2x plus 5. The second parentheses will be the second fraction, so that's x and positive 1, so x plus 1. And remember, you can always FOIL or distribute to check if you're right. If you are correct, it'll bring you right back up to the original function. And then from here, we're going to do the same thing for number 2. Now, you have ax squared minus c. C is the constant. So remember, in a quadratic function, you have ax squared and bx and c. This could be plus or minus, by the way. We're missing the bx. So this happens to be a difference of squares. So I'm going to show you two ways. If you recognize that it is a difference of squares, one is always plus and one is always minus, and then you just take the square root of each one of them. Not with the minus sign though. Keep in mind this is already called a difference of squares, so the difference or subtraction sign is already accounted for. So the square root of x squared is x. Each parentheses will begin with x, and the square root of 25 is 5. So this is the factored form. But let's say you can't identify it's a difference of squares, you didn't recognize it. That's fine. You can actually rewrite this as x squared. And remember, we didn't have the bx, so I'm just going to write plus 0x because it's not there, and then minus 25. And you can just do the same thing we did for number 1. Multiply first times last. So 1 times negative 25 is negative 25. I need two numbers that multiply to be negative 25 and add up to be 0. And those two numbers happen to be 5 and negative 5. And then over each one, again, I'll put the first number and split up the x squared. You don't really have to put the 1 if it's the first coefficient. So then your two parentheses will again read x plus 5 and x minus 5. So just a little shortcut as well, if that works out for you. For number 3, you do have all three terms. We're looking for two numbers that multiply to be 6 and add up to be negative 5. So that means the only way we can get two numbers that multiply to be a positive is if they're both positive or if they're both negative. Only same signs when you multiply them will come out to be a positive answer. So those two numbers will be negative 2 and negative 3. And over each number, you can put the 1 there, but it's not necessary, and split up the x squared as x. And then there's nothing to reduce, so this will say x minus 2, and the other one will say x minus 3. Now for number 4, you also have, again, a difference of squares. Remember, you only have ax squared and c, the constant, and it's being subtracted. So if we'll just square root each one from here, the square root of 9x squared is 3x. And the square root of 4 is going to be 2. And again, if you didn't recognize that it is a difference of squares, you can also rewrite it as 9x squared plus 0x minus 4 and do the same pattern as well. You need two numbers that multiply to be negative 36 and add up to be 0. And those two numbers happen to be 6 and -6. And then over each one of them, you'll put 9x, and they can both be reduced. You can divide each one of these by 3. Sorry, I'm out of room on this one. So this will reduce into 3x over -2 and then 3x over +2. And these two fractions are your two parentheses, 3x plus 2 and 3x minus 2. So in case you don't recognize the difference of squares, you can also just put bx as 0x and just factor using a times c and find two numbers that add up to be b. All right, guys, hope this helps.